All right. Good night, everyone, and welcome to the Stream Memorial Library Virtual YA Book Club. Tonight, we are joined by the Hamilton South Caddo Branch's LGBT plus book club, and we are going to be exploring LGBT plus YA books. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over now to Hannah and Matthew.
Hi, my name is Hannah Huang. I am the branch manager of the Hamilton South Caddo Library. Just a little bit about me. I've been a librarian for about 17 years now. And one of my missions has always been to make sure that everyone has a place in the library. With this particular book club, I'm excited to say we've got lots of books for the LGBT book club. Please come to the Hamilton South Caddo branch or any of our branches, and we can definitely show you a pretty good selection.
My name is Matthew. I am the assistant manager at the Hamilton South Caddo branch, and just like Hannah, I like to make sure that the library provides a space for everyone and materials for everybody. And I, as a reader, particularly enjoy reading teen LGBT fiction, and so that was one of my things that I like to read and what I bring to the discussion. And Hannah is really good at leading book discussions, so we kind of team up and do this together.
What I always like to ask folks, whatever book club that they're in, is that what's your favorites? And I know it's hard sometimes just to choose one, but you can choose a couple, or if you've got more than a couple, I really would love to know about them. If you see me just kind of writing something and scribbling, it's because I'm writing the title down, because it may be something I've never read before and it may sound interesting. So I'm going to start scribbling whenever I hear really great titles. As for myself, one of my favorite books is Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe. It's by Benjamin Alir Sons, and he is such an incredible writer. And this is one of my favorite books, and I really recommend anyone to just really pick this up. And he writes not only YA books, but also adult as well. And he writes in both of those formats. They're just really, really good. So do you guys have any book recommendations or books that you really enjoy?
I'll go next. Let me grab this one. I have a lot of books that I recommend, but one of my favorite series, it's a pretty big series. It's called the Something Like series. And this is the first one. It's called Something Like Summer. It is by J. Bell. And what's interesting, it's a series, gosh, it's about 10 or more books. And it basically follows two characters from age 16 when they meet all the way to like in the future to when they're older in their 80s and 90s. So it's kind of what's really interesting about it is each book in the series is about a new character, but their story is intertwined with the two main characters. And so it's each book you get a little bit more of the story, and it's from a different character's perspective. And so it starts out as teen fiction, but then it kind of goes into adult fiction. So it's good for kind of both. But I have a ton of other books that I would recommend. I could sit here and talk for a while, but I'll let somebody else go now if there's anybody else that wants to talk about their favorite books or recommendations.
Well, I'll go next. I mean, my favorite genre of books is I like something that's suspenseful with the mystery. So it can be any genre, as long as there's a good, suspenseful, edge of my seat story. That's kind of what I like.
Good.
And I'll go. I have, you know what, this is middle grade and it's the sequel, but it's 5, 6, 7, and 8 by Tim Federle. I'm a huge Tim Federle fan. He has a YA book called The Great American Whatever, which is all of his books are so funny, and they'll also make you cry about like 3/4 of the way through. They're all really great. The Nate series is juvenile books, so like upper elementary and middle school. If you are into musical theater, Tim Federle was on Broadway, and he uses that experience in his books.
Cool.
Awesome. And I know that in our title of the book club, we say YA, but sometimes YA can straddle the line between adults as well. So I don't want anyone to feel constrained by that if a book is not YA or if it is adult. I mean, we definitely want to know about, well, all kinds of books that you're reading. One of the books that I'm reading right now is, I don't know if you can see my screen, I'm reading it on my tablet, but it's called Gideon the Ninth, and it is so good. It's science fiction. It's in the adult sci-fi section. But there's a tagline right there at the bottom, and it says, lesbian necromancers explore a haunted Gothic palace in space.
Wow.
And so with that,
a lot.
it just grabbed me. And I mean, and I think the writer, I mean, has no compulsion trying to hide, what it is. And I really respected that. And so that kind of grabbed me. And so when I started reading it, oh my gosh, it is so good. And in this particular book, the characters are female, but they're also sword fighters, they're in space. And what I like is that the two characters really hate each other, but they don't take it personally. and somehow they're able to pull it off really, really well. And I don't know if it's an aspect of, the lesbian relationship where you don't have to be you don't have to be like a person with a lot of emotions. I mean, it's fine. They're sword fighters, so they don't have to hug, but it is just really, really good. And I'm highly recommend it. I'm probably going to send it to Kirk for one of my Friday reads.
Awesome.
Great. Yeah, I've heard Gideon the Ninth is so good.
Awesome.
One thing that I really like about young adult LGBT fiction or in general, is like it has something for everybody. Like if you are a teenager who is just trying to discover your identity or learning more about identities in general, then it's got that. If you're a romance lover, most of them involve romance, or there's some that involve the science fiction and mystery. And like one example, I have this one right here. It's called Infinity Sun, and it's one of the, I see it on the shelf all the time, and I can tell from the cover that it's science fiction, but I never knew it was LGBT related until I actually sat down and started reading what it was about. And it's cool. Sometimes you have books that are obviously LGBT related. It is a romance between two LGBT people, or it could be a book that has a story, but it just happens to have LGBT plus characters. So there's and a lot of them too will have deep meaningful topics too. There was one of the ones we were reading for our book club is called The Music of What Happens, and this is a bit of a spoiler alert, but if you haven't read it, it seems like just a typical romance, and then you find out that there's a person who is suffering from they've been raped, and so they're dealing with that, and so there's they have problems with emotional connections because of that. And so there's people who I think can identify with or just about anybody can identify with something out of all of these books, and that's what I like most about them, I think.
I read a really good scholarly article about why you should incorporate LGBT books in high school English class curriculums. And it's the idea of that books are windows and mirrors as well. They're windows for anyone who don't necessarily identify, with that group, so they can be in that person's shoes through the books. But they're also mirrors in that the people who identify with the characters can see themselves and can know that they're not alone, that their experience is worldwide. It's lots of things I think when you're a teen, you feel things a lot harder. You may not realize that some things are universal and that some things are temporary as well. When you're right in the midst of it, it can be very hard. Having LGBT books as mirrors gives you a way to see that there is a world out there, and that you are not alone. But as a window, all of us can read a book as a window, whether we look at another person from another country and say, I don't really have any interest in that country at all. But a book can have universal themes that even though it's in a country that, I'll just take a country, Iceland or something, or in Japan, and you think, I've never thought about these countries. I'm really not interested in reading a book set there. It can have a plot and character that's universal as time. I read a really great book about father-son relationship that took place in an Asian country. And I thought to myself, there's nothing about this book that is only for that country. Relationships between family members and conflict, those are all over the world. And they could be conflict between LGBT persons as well, or they could be conflict between people of color or Asians. But you can never say that I have no interest in this book because of this reason. The plot and the characters, there's a great universality to it.
For sure.
I agree. I think that's with all books, you know. I think if the story is there and you can relate to some aspect of the story, then I think, you know, all books are worthwhile. And so I like reading everything.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
One of the best things about a book club is that you can just go off in a lot of different tangents and I'm going to go off on a tangent. We read in one of my book clubs, Hillbilly Elegy. I don't know if you've heard about it or if you've read it, but it's about growing up in Appalachia. Very, very poor and white in Appalachia. And first, I kind of picked it up thinking the same thing, that I don't have any kind of connection to it. But when I read it, it was the writing style. It was just people in great desperation. And I mean, that is universal everywhere. And so the same thing, I hope if someone thinks about picking up a book that is LGBT, has a theme, and they don't necessarily were thinking about picking it up, I think they should just try it. 25 pages, that's kind of like a rule that I have. If you don't like it after 25 pages, you can put it down.
I like that rule.
One thing that I wanted to discuss too is just like how much Shreve Memorial Library itself has as far as LGBT literature in general, but especially our teen collection. Like there's every day I'll discover a book that I've seen on the shelf but didn't realize it was LGBT related. And especially, I would say in the past 5 to 10 years in general, there's been like an explosion of books coming out in the LGBT teen kind of genre. And I'm slightly jealous of like teens nowadays, because like if I would have had I'm 30, so I'm not that old, but if I would have had those kind of books when I was a teenager, I think my life would have been a little bit different around that time frame for sure. And it's like, one thing I like about reading like the sappy romance kind of LGBT books is like I read them and, you know, I kind of live vicariously through them, thinking like, you know, my teen years could have been like that, or my teen years could have been different. And, but you know, not only do we have just so much, but what I like is not everybody likes the typical romance, right? You know, a lot of people like more, yeah, exactly. But there's there's memoirs that are really interesting. One of my favorite memoirs that I recently read, it is a biography, a YA biography. It's called Transmission: My Quest to a Beard. And it is just a memoir by a semi-famous YouTuber who is transgender. And essentially it's about, it's a memoir, but it's also a guide, kind of giving advice to other trans teens and kind of giving them the process of self-realization, realizing that you're trans, and then what do you do from that point, and how do you talk to your parents about it, and then going from that to like the medical standpoint of like medically transitioning. Well, there's social transitioning and then medically transitioning, and it's just really interesting because it's this particular book too is interesting because it's very illustrated. You'll find a lot of memoirs lately, I've noticed, will have like cute little drawings and stuff in them that relate to whatever the narrator is talking about. But another, like if you like graphic novels, I've noticed a lot of graphic novels lately in the LGBT genre. This one happens to be both a memoir and a graphic novel, and it's essentially about a person's their kind of identity and learning about their identity, and it's written in the form of a graphic novel, which I think is really cool. Not everybody likes to sit and read a novel. Not everybody can relate to novels and can sit and read through one, and so I think it's really cool that there's just different it's like a genre within a genre, I guess.
Right. And I think the graphic novel memoirs are really popular. Our last YA book club meeting was of a graphic novel memoir. So.
And they're really quick reads. I know one of the graphic novels, or one of the books we chose for, I think it's the last book club we had maybe, was Bloom, which is this one. And even though it's a slightly thick book, it was a very quick read. I don't know how long it took you, Hannah, to read it, but I breezed through it in a couple days. But like the story itself was there, so you got the whole story, but it just was a quicker read because you're paying attention to like the pictures and stuff. But even then, if you don't like fiction, there's nonfiction, and besides memoirs, there are things like, this is one I picked up today. It's called Queer There and Everywhere, and it's 23 people who changed the world. So it is young adult nonfiction, and it's just about different lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and otherwise queer people who have done something significant for the LGBT plus community.
That was really cool. Matt and I were talking about YA books, LGBTQ YA books within the last few years, and how their popularity has changed. And I was thinking about it, and there are a lot of different reasons for it, but I was thinking more along the social political reasons as well. And one of them is, of course, in 2015, the Supreme Court ruled same-sex marriage is legal, can be the law of the land. Another is that the military overturned Don't Ask, Don't Tell. I think I'm an old person, so I remember when Don't Ask, Don't Tell was instituted. And so I think that young adults growing up now, even though it's been 5 years since the Supreme Court did the landmark decision, their recent memory is that gay people can marry, and that's like normal to them. And they may not remember a time when it wasn't normal, And so that maybe YA books that are more recently published have that in mind, that gay people can marry if they want to. And that's like an end game to a plot, where before it might not have been. Maybe two people would have gotten together, but marriage was not an end game yet. And I think that changes, stories. Especially for LGBT storylines, where that in the end, if a couple gets together, they don't necessarily have to marry at the end, but it is possible for them. And so that changes, I think, YA, memoirs, fiction, nonfiction too. I'm kind of a geek like that. When I think about evolution of books, I think I've read books long enough where I remember how it once was, and I see the progression of how it has gotten better.
And I just want to piggyback on that real quick, because you just made me think of something when you're talking about the evolution of the LGBT book genre and that there's more of them there. We just did Banned Book Week in September, and of the 10 most challenged books, I want to say 8 of them were challenged because of their LGBT content. And so I just was wondering, like, what do you guys think about that? Because I mean, while it is changing, there are still lots of people who are struggling with this change and seeing this so prominent in the YA books and those things. So just maybe some thoughts, talking points.
I think that's why it's really important for the library to provide these types of materials too, and why teens can just come in and browse and not have someone looking over their shoulder to see what they're reading, and they can find out, this may be the only time you ever, like, a teenager may have never met another queer person, or they may not know anything about being queer, but they can pick up a book and read about it and kind of like relate to it and see that it is normal. And that's another thing Hannah and I were talking about today, is how, like, the stories that have gay characters, but it's not a gay story, how it more normalizes being LGBT, and it's not so, I guess, stigmatized or whatnot.
I think as a librarian, you're always disappointed when anything is banned. It's kind of odd because America and the world is so big that something is going to be banned somewhere. And that's what we should always keep in perspective. It may be a town in another state, but there are lots of towns and lots of states, and we should never blow it out of proportion to say, to give it credence where it is just in a particular town. I think that Street Memorial Library is great in that we have so many subject matters. We have a process if someone does want to bring it up. I've never myself in my 17 years really had a patron dislike a book so much that they actually came and went through the procedure of trying to have it removed. I know it's out there, but I'm glad to say that in my career, I haven't seen it personally.
That's reassuring. I always come from thinking, like, if you don't like it, don't read it. That's
right.
Just me.
I've heard people might complain about a particular book, but once you explain the process of if you do truly feel that this book should not be in the library, there is a process for you to go through. They are like, well, whatever, and then they don't worry about it. So if they truly felt that it was a problem, they probably would go through the process. But anyways.
One thought that I was just thinking, and I think Matthew kind of touched on it. We were talking about LGBT YA books, but you also mentioned that while there's more of those, we are seeing more LGBT characters in books that are not necessarily considered an LGBT book. So I guess my question is, what makes the book an LGBT book? And that may be a dumb question, but with some books that are not necessarily, like you said, a gay story, but they have gay characters and they have, those situations. So what makes one or the other? Or to
me, it is if the overall story focuses on whether the characters are LGBT, or if it is an overall story between LGBT characters, like a love story, or if the theme of the book is really making sure that you understand that these people are LGBT plus, and that, or if it's, if it's a book about, I don't know, witches and stuff, but that, one of the characters mentions that they're gay, then, that's just cool. That's just a gay character. It's just, a book might be about, a man and a woman who are in love, but one of the characters is a redhead, but the story is not about a redheaded book, a character, you know what I mean? So that's kind of the difference to me. But I really like, we have the, lovely catalog that we get to look at and patrons can look at, and like you can pull up a book and just it'll list all the different subjects that come up in like one book. And one of, like, for example, the Music of What Happens, which was one of our book club books that I thought I had with me, but I don't. This particular book, you know, the very first subject is gay teenagers. So, you know, yeah, it is a gay book for sure, but it also goes into, you know, Hispanic American teenagers, homophobia, racism, identity, male rape, mothers and sons, secrecy, gays, Hispanic Americans. So it's just like, you know, kind of my point of that is being that like there are just so many different aspects to these books that I always find. It's not just, you know, they're very layered to me. And I think that's what's really important, because someone can relate to, you know, probably more than one of just, you know, of those subject of the themes in a book, in one of these books. You know, you may not be LGBT, but you may be Hispanic and maybe have you know, experience prejudice based on that, and so you're going to relate that way. Or maybe or identity in general, because, you know, identity isn't just related to sexuality and gender. There's identity, you know, in any aspect of life. So I think that's why I think it's just so cool that, you know, these books can really, anybody can relate to them.
I think that, you know, in school, you're assigned books to read, but once you're not in those classes, those English classes anymore, you get to choose what you read, you know. And I think that people will first go for what is familiar to them. But I hope that they go into a library where they don't have to buy the book, and they can just experiment with it and just pick up something. And that they'll see that it still relates to them, even though the main characters or the main plots or the main themes, it doesn't seem like it. As far as the LGBT books and what makes it so, I don't know either. I think Matt, you've got some good definitions there. And sometimes for myself, I'll do both. I'll read the back cover and get the plot or the summary, and I'll think this is really neat. It does have an LGBT character in it. I'm gonna try it and see. And other times where you can read that is just a side character, and that may be enough. I mean, that the plot and the plot and the other things grabbed your attention, and then but you do know that there's a side character that's gay, and that's the great thing about not having someone tell you what to read. You can kind of decide yourself.
Awesome. Thank you for that.
Well, I am always interested in how people read, especially now with digital and with the print format. And sometimes it always seems like there's two camps. The ones who love the hard print, and they say, I love the feel and the touch of it, and I'll never own a Kindle. And others are, sometimes the folks are younger, and they'll say, what? Can I download it? But I am always interested in how people read and like under what circumstances. So can you guys tell me? I'll tell you that I'm primarily a digital reader, and I don't know how that happened. I was like, all my life before the Kindle, books were just fine, and all of a sudden now they're too heavy. You know, all of a sudden now they're too inconvenient to carry around. And if I have the choice of a print book or a tablet, I will 99% of the time always choose the tablets. But how about you, Matt? I see that you've got a bunch of books there. What are you doing?
Yeah. Okay, so I'm kind of like a hybrid, I guess. I'm a lover of audiobooks, and it is because one, I can read while I'm doing other things. So like I listen to audiobooks on my way to work or while I'm cleaning and that kind of thing. And I love audiobooks because of the narration, because what makes or breaks an audiobook to me is whoever's reading it. What I love especially, which another example, I'll use the Music of What Happens. It's two different actors reading the parts. And so it's, it's like a production, because it's almost like you're listening to a TV show, because it's different actors reading different parts. But also, I also love having the physical book too. And so I end up doing both. And so I have a lot of books that I own, but I've only ever listened to them. But what I also like to do is I'll while I'm traveling, like I said, I'll listen to it, and then I'll come home and I'll pick up the actual book and read some out of it, and then go back to the audiobook. And so you get a different experience too. It's interesting. If you read a book and then listen to the audiobook, or vice versa, it's a very different experience.
It is.
That's impressive. That you listen to it and then pick it up and start reading where you stop
It's
listening.
not easy, because sometimes I'm flipping. I was like, wait, did I read that?
Yeah, I would be so lost.
I usually try to make sure I stop at the beginning of a chapter.
That makes sense.
Samantha, what about you? Are you a digital or a hard copy?
I am a hard copy reader. I used to read all the time, and I would always get multiple books and I'd read through them. And then I had my daughter, and reading became a foreign subject to me besides bedtime stories. But thanks to COVID, I've started reading again, and I'm so proud of myself because I've actually finished like 4 books this year, which is amazing because I am never able to do that. Like, I have one book, I swear I've been reading it for 2 years. It's ridiculous. But I've finished 4 books this year. And I usually read right before I get ready to go to bed, because that's my quiet time. Other than that, there's no peace in my house.
I know some people with who love the hard copy books. I'm the lover of the sentence. If there's like a great sentence that just encapsulates everything, I will stop. I'll stop and I'll write it down. Some people will highlight the page or write some marginalia in the page. Do you guys do that, or is it a library book so you don't want to do that?
No, I am on my library books. I won't do that, but on the books that I buy, I do not crease them. I do not write in them. I try to keep them perfect so they look like they're brand new, and like that's like my thing. Like, I don't want it to look like I've read the book, and like they're on the shelf perfectly neat. So yeah, no.
That's one thing. One thing, like, I'm like that too, and I always try to buy a hardcover, because once you read a paperback, it's like the spine is just ruined.
Oh, you guys are those people.
Yes.
I am. That is me. Sorry.
Yeah.
I mark up nonfiction books with a pencil. Okay. I don't like to touch my fiction books though.
What if there's a really good sentence?
If there's something I really, really like that I want to remember, I will type it out into Evernote or into a note-taking app, and I'll leave. So I'll have and I can tag it by the author or what it's about.
Cool.
But then, I don't have to mess with my my books.
I have a little journal that I jot down all of my sentences that I like. And I've been keeping this for years.
That's smart.
So it's like passages I like, I'll jot them down, but nothing in the book. It has its own book for that.
Unfortunately, when I'm driving, I can't pull unless I pull over and then write a sentence or something. I just have to try to remember it.
Yeah.
I think it's funny that you said you want your book to look like you've never read it.
I do. And then I'm the worst if someone borrows one of my books too. I'm like, have you brought it back yet? It's like my child. I'm like, when are you bringing back my book? And please don't bend the pages and give it back to me like I give it to you.
I was just about to say, that's why I don't lend my books. If I have a book that somebody wants to borrow, I will literally check it out from the library and then let them use it. Like, I would rather you have a late fee on my library card than you borrow my book.
That's not a bad idea.
Or try to get them to get their own library card.
Yeah. Kirk, do you read digitally or the hard books?
I am a little bit of everything. I spend a lot of time staring at screens. So when I sit down at night, I like to have a actual paper, so I'm not just getting the blue light. I listen to audiobooks when I walk or do the dishes or before I go to sleep. But I always forget where I am in the morning if I fall asleep listening to one.
Yeah.
And then if I usually have a couple ebooks on my phone. So if I'm waiting in line, I'll try to read a little bit of an ebook.
I didn't mention, but sometimes I also have the ebook, Samantha, and I'll do all three. So yeah,
You're blowing my
be able
mind.
to. I don't think I'd be able to do that.
That is
Lost.
awesome. I would be so lost. I would be like, did he say this? Did I hear this right? Or I think maybe, yeah, I would be lost. It'd be a mess.
I am sometimes, but it's just like, that's how, like, I don't want to carry the physical book around. And then so if I'm at work, I'm more likely to, like, on a break, I'll read the ebook. And then, like I said, if I'm driving, I'll listen to the audiobook. And then when I get home, I'll read the physical book. So I'm going to get the book somehow.
Yeah. Now, I have read ebooks, and there are a couple of ebooks that I've read, but it was usually because I checked the book out from the library and I used up all of my renewals and had turned the book back in. And so I went and got it on Hoopla or Libby where I could finish it on my phone. Like I said, I'm proud of myself for reading 4 books this year because it usually takes me forever. I just don't have the time.
I have a question for everybody. Does everybody, or do you prefer to read one book at a time, or you're one of the people who can read multiple books at a time?
I read a lot of books at once.
Okay.
Yeah. But I try to keep it to like one of each genre, so
okay,
I can sort of tell the difference between what I'm doing. So like right now, I am listening to George Saunders essays, and I am reading let's see, Night Sky with Exit Wounds by Ocean Vuong. It's a excellent poetry book, and I haven't been great at I haven't been able to read a novel since basically the pandemic started, but maybe one day I'll get back.
Yeah, I like to read one book at a time. Like I said, 4 books this year. I'm proud of myself. Let's not do too much at one time. One book at a time for me.
I'll start a book and it may be a little bit large, like 400 pages, and just by 200, I'm kind of pooped, I'm kind of worn out. And then I'll put it down, and then I'll start another book, go into 100 pages of that book, not finish it, but then go back to my original book. And I think it just kind of gives me a break. If you read a book continuously for like 200 pages, I kind of need a little nap afterwards. But I mean, it kind of refreshes me after I've been away for it for a little while.
Like, do you read like 200 pages at one time? Like, I'm totally impressed if you do, because I'm just like, what? I can't do it.
It's got to be a really good book. I mean, it's got to be for 200 pages. But I think I may burn myself out. I think if I'm just...
Yeah, I was gonna say, if you can sit down and you're just reading like 200 pages at a time, and then you need a break because you're tired, like, I don't know how you do it. I'm so impressed.
Geeky librarians.
For me, I feel like a toddler surrounded by toys, because I'm like, oh, okay, oh, look at this book, and then I'll start reading it, and I'm like, oh, look at this book, and then so I'm just like constantly switching, because like I want to read them all, but I can't just like continuously read one book.
Yeah.
But my problem is
I'm great at starting books.
That's what I was gonna say. My problem is sometimes I don't finish them.
So yeah, I have 2 books right now that I have been reading for, like I said, 2 years. One is a novel that I just cannot get through, but it was from like one of my favorite authors that I used to read before I had Ruby, and I read his books all the time. And so I picked up one of his books, and I was like, I'm gonna get back in, and I just can't get back into the book. So that book I've been reading for like 2 years. And then I have a book that is kind of like a self-help book that I've been reading for about a year, when I don't have any books that I'm interested in to read.
Hmm.
But I will check out like 3 books at a time. But I'm gonna start with one, finish that one, and then move to the next. Unless I start it and I don't like it, then I'll get rid of it and go to the next book.
Hmm.
So that one book where you said you've been reading it for a few years, I mean, you're not considering it complete, or you're not considering it, I'm never going to finish it. Oh my gosh.
It's this one, and I
Oh, yeah.
swear I've read like 3 chapters. I just cannot get into this book, but I still have it because I'm going to read it one day.
You're not giving up on it.
No, I really like Ted Dekker books, or at least I used to.
Hmm.
And this one, I just cannot get into it. It's just, it's not the other books. But I have it. I bought it, and so it has a cute bookmark of Ruby in it.
Oh,
One day,
I'm kind of like,
maybe.
I'll have books where I feel like I need to read them, for whatever reason. If I feel like it's some subject matter, I feel like I need to read this, and so I'll have it going. And when, like Hannah was saying, you need a break from it, so I'll go to my fluff. I have some books that I just call fluff, because it's just it's just a cute love story and blah blah blah. But then you have like the serious hardcore, like serious issues and stuff like that. So that's one reason why I go back and forth too, because sometimes you can't just go constantly on the same subject matter.
Mm-hmm.
See, that's why I like my mystery and suspense books, because they're like, I gotta know what's gonna happen next.
Mm-hmm.
I can't do romance. I can't do coming of age. I try, and they just, I
Well, the
can't.
good thing about romance is sometimes it's, mystery and suspense, because like, is it going to work out? Or, are all these different factors that are keeping them apart, are they going to be able to resolve them? And how are they going to do this and that?
Okay.
Kind
Next
of
time I read a romance, I'll look at it that way.
yeah. One that's the one I keep talking about, the music of what happens, is like that too, because like there's the character who has to deal with rape, or dealt with, who was raped. That's one of the factors keeping them apart, is because he has problems connecting with people. And so you're trying to figure out, like, how is he going to get over this, and you're kind of discovering like the person, his who ends up being his boyfriend, how he ends up helping him through it. And his relationship with his mother, because that's a strained thing, and then how the other character helps him out with that. So
Yeah. Okay. Well,
Matt,
I have a question for you two. We've been talking about all of these books. So I just finished my last book. Yay. I'm waiting on my next checkouts to be available. But what is like one LGBT book that you would recommend that I read?
oh
Putting you
gosh.
on the spot.
Look at this, right?
Yes.
I guarantee you there is mystery and suspense LGBT fiction. I just would have to use my librarian skills to dig that up.
Well, I'll give you that task to you. You can email it to me later.
Yes, that'll be my homework assignment.
Perfect.
Matt and I were talking earlier about LGBT YA books, and like one of the sad aspects of it is that, especially if the characters are YA, between the ages of 12 and 18, is that when the book ends and they're 18, you as the reader, who are a little bit older, that life goes on. Mm-hmm. So that if it was a romance and the two 18-year-olds, in the end had a happy ending, you're happy for them. But then you realize, God, I'm only 18. There's so much more living to do, and just by living, you're gonna break up because you're 18, and so, and I think, that can be said with non-LGBT books as well. But for LGBT, you want your characters, if you really like them, to have a good life. And in part, you've got to experience a lot of things. And so when a book ends in a happy ending, you as a reader says, that's great, but there's so much more living to do. You may not stay in your situation of this happy ending. And so with YA books, when folks are going off to college, you just know that whatever plot line in high school, life is gonna be so much more different for them when they go to college and beyond. So with YA books, there's kind of a bittersweet sometimes, and that life is going to change for them.
For sure. Because I know, like what I was telling Hannah is, like, from personal experience, I know I am very different than currently I am very different than I was when I was 18, or 16. A lot of these books, the characters are 16, 17, 18. And so, like Hannah was saying, they're going to experience things, their life, they're going to change and evolve. And so obviously they're not going to stay with this person forever, because it's cute to think about high school sweethearts and going on to live their life forever, but unfortunately that hardly ever happens. But I will say, in the one series that I was talking about, the Something Like Summer series, it starts when they're 16 and it ends when they are in their 80s. So you get their entire it skips a few years obviously, but you get their whole how they end up, they go their separate ways and then they come back together. And so that's another thing I like about it, is it's more, I guess, realistic in the fact that they break up when I'm spoiling it kind of, but they break up as teenagers, but then they find their way back to each other because they were meant to be.
Oh, so sweet.
Yep.
How many books are in this series?
I want to say about 10.
Wow.
Or so. I'm trying to picture it in my head, because it's basically, if you notice, this one's orange. Each book is a different color of the rainbow plus some. So however many colors that is, plus a few more.
Awesome.
And so it's also really cool when you have them on your shelf, because it's just, it's a rainbow.
I was thinking the exact same thing.
So for us who like the physical book too, like me and Samantha, we get to look at our books and enjoy them.
Yes. Yeah. Awesome. Well, is there anything else you guys would like to add? I've enjoyed our conversation tonight. We're about 50 minutes in, so if there's anything else y'all want to add or that we haven't talked about, and if anyone who else is listening, if you want to add something through the chat, you can. I know not everyone is wanting to speak, but you can enter your comments through the chat box and we'll take them that way too.
I just want to reiterate what I was saying about the fact that the library does have so many resources for everybody. But I know a lot of people don't realize that we do have so many resources for LGBT folks. And so that's something, if you're, I know we're recording this, so if we're watching it later, maybe, if you're seeing this later on, be sure to come to any of the library branches and check out the LGBT collections. They are not, they're in their separate section, but if you get help with your librarian, we can show you where they're at, and hopefully you find some gems.
And also, if anyone out there wants to come to the library and you don't particularly, you're just a do-it-yourselfer, you don't particularly want to talk to us librarians, which is fine. If you go to just Google, Goodreads, and get some titles, and then go to our library's catalog and you can look that up as well. We've got a really great selection. I think Matt pulled up just for Hamilton South Caddo's what we have at our branch, and it's a really, really good collection. I mean, just imagine the whole library system.
Exactly.
And I think the younger folks, I mean, they may not want to talk to us older people. They can Google it. They can see the titles that look interesting to them, and please go to Enterprise. And if we can't, if we don't have it on our shelf, we can do an interlibrary loan for it. Definitely.
For sure.
Well, that is awesome. Well, is there anything else we want to add before we wrap up for tonight? This has been fun. I can't wait to see what book you guys recommend for me.
Yes, I'm going to do my research. Hopefully I don't end up with like a 10-page list, but I'll
That's
try to narrow it
okay.
down.
That's okay, because I'll put it on my to be read list and I'll add them in there. We did have a comment, and the comment says, I can walk to a local library from my house, and I'm very excited to read some of the LGBTQ plus books you guys previously mentioned. So yay!
Awesome.
We can't wait to see you in one of our branches. So
Excellent.
For sure.
Awesome.
And if you happen to look at the catalog, like Hannah was saying, I think, if you do a subject search for any particular, like, for example, if you do gay teens, you're going to find, literally hundreds of books. Or you can type in lesbian teens, or you can just type in lesbian or bisexual or whatever, and you can find, whatever it is that you're looking for.
awesome. Well, thank you, everyone. We'll go ahead and wrap for tonight. And I hope everyone has a good night. And thank you so much. This has been a lot of fun. I really enjoyed you guys.
Me too. Thank you, Samantha.
Thank you.
You're welcome.